Okay. So for better or worse now, this was my title, Why Horizontal Development Needs Vertical Development and Vice Versa. Okay, so you're from Israel. I know the answers now, you see, to these.
Yes.
I wanted to investigate the geography and then to find out people's interest in the topic. And I speculated about how many geographies would be involved, but we could probably edit this piece out if we have a clever YouTube editor.
I can say that in Israel, we have like 4 or 5 different geographies area. We have the desert, we have the mountains, we have like we have very much differentiality. How do you say it about that? Only in Israel. So I'm like 3 other people here.
And Rebecca, I should give you a chance to share your geography with Rona because she doesn't know where you are.
Yeah, so I'm in the southwest of England. So
Nice.
about 100 miles west of London, near the coast in Devon. But it probably might not mean much to you.
Sounds beautiful. I've never been in England before, so not yet, but it sounds perfect.
Very green, quite wet. Yeah, quite beautiful.
Yeah, good.
Yeah,
amazing.
In that part of England at least. Yeah, so that's, you'll be able to kill the 2 of those, Rona, together. You can take in Ireland and England on the same trip.
I'm in. Count me in. Once I will be able to come.
So I thought the best way to introduce myself would be through pictures. And this is me in pictures. A picture paints 1,000 words. So on the top left, my family, my wife Siobhan and my 3 adult children, Simon, Jack and Louise. And on the extreme left, Jimmy, the boyfriend, when that photograph was taken back in June. And then he became Jimmy, the fiance, a couple of weeks later, the middle photograph at the top. And that's Coco in Jimmy's arms, our little dog who rules the roost. I try to stay active. I play golf badly. And from time to time, I cycle with a group of fellow mammals. You know what mammals are? Middle-aged men in lycra, not a pretty sight. And I think maybe middle-age might be stretching it. But anyway, at the bottom is a photograph of my mom and dad taken in recent weeks with 3 of their 4 great-grandchildren and my niece, Joanne, the mother of those 3. On the left, this alludes to my interest in gardening. Some of this year's summer bedding, photographed a couple of weeks back. And then I threw in my COVID passport, which is really part of what I am today. And finally, my my interest in work, personified by this particular book, Personal and Organizational Transformations, co-authored by a work colleague, David Rupp. So I work with a company called Hart Hill, and this kind of signifies what we are about. We focus on leadership development, and support the development of individuals, teams, and organizations from an adult development perspective, and leveraging a tool called the Leadership Development Profile. So this was my chosen topic, and I regret the language because I think it wasn't sufficiently invitational, and I'm sure it could have been more creative, but it is what it is. And I wanted to start the session because I live in the west of Ireland in a place called Galway. It's famous for its arts festival. So we're quite close to the arts, to theatre and to music. So I thought I would start with a little piece of poetry from a west of Ireland author. I'll explain why in a moment. May my mind come alive today to the invisible geography that invites me to new frontiers, to break the dead shell of yesterdays, to risk being disturbed and changed. May I have the courage today to live the life that I would love, to postpone my dream no longer, but to do at last what I came here for, and waste my heart on fear no more. That's from a wonderful West of Ireland writer called John O'Donoghue, from a piece of work called Benedictus. But I chose this piece because I think the first verse of it captures the notion of vertical development, in that our development is this continuous breaking of the dead shell that held us yesterday, and we risk being disturbed and changed as we move forward and learn and grow more. So I'd like to ask you to reflect for a moment and just to think about all that you know. So I've got a whole load of books behind me here. I've read most of them, and I know a lot of stuff. Think about all you know. Think for a moment about all you've ever learned. Think about all your past experiences. You couldn't possibly, in the short time I'm giving you. Think about all your emotional experiences. All of that contained here in your thinking. Think about all of your relationships. Think about your work network. Think about your social network. Think about the community you live in, the city you live in, the country you live in. And all of that contained here, and perhaps maybe distributed throughout your physical presence. But I invite you to reflect about what you know, on the basis that I want you to imagine that in this talk and from this talk, that I introduced you to something completely new, something you never heard before. This is a piece of knowledge that I've just come up with, haven't told anybody else, and you guys are the first to hear this piece of knowledge. And let's say that 40 people watch this talk. You might imagine that the net effect of that would be that 40 people would now know this piece of knowledge that came to life here, and then because I exchanged the piece of knowledge, that 40 people know it, and now 41 know it. That doesn't actually capture what happens to us, because knowledge is not discrete and independent, because when we take knowledge on board, we mix it in with all we know already. So the knowledge we take in is impacted by and lands in your place differently to how it left my place, if you like. So it's not just that 40 people would know about this piece of knowledge. It would land differently with those 40 people, and they would in turn perhaps pass it on differently. And this is to capture the nature of our topic, why horizontal development needs vertical development and vice versa. So let's start off by seeking to understand the distinction between these two. I've been unable to find the source of this language, who came up with this notion of horizontal and vertical development. It's limited in the sense that our understanding of what horizontal means and what vertical means is different, and it doesn't really relate to the topic, but it's useful in the sense that it helps us to distinguish between these two forms of development. So I want to share some ideas about what these two things mean. Horizontal development equates to knowledge acquisition and competence development. This is a form of learning and development we're all familiar with, because most of our educational systems are based on this model. Horizontal development increases what you know, and if you apply what you're learning in practice, it can strengthen your technical expertise. Competence doesn't happen immediately. We need to acquire the knowledge, apply it in practice, and then develop the technical expertise. So this is critically important. And it's essential for using known techniques to solve clearly defined problems. So for example, if I didn't know how to tie my shoelace, I could get a lesson from somebody who knows how to do that. They could show me how to do it. And if I applied that knowledge and practice, I would be able to solve that problem. It helps us to develop our functional knowledge, our skills and behaviors, and this impacts on our leadership toolkit. It influences how we lead because we develop functional knowledge that we can use in our leadership. And metaphorically, it's like adding new apps to our device. I'm just going to share then how vertical development is different in relation to each of these 4 points. Vertical development is about mindset transformation. It's about changing how you know things. So this improves how you think and how you interpret situations. So while on the one hand, horizontal development increases what you know and strengthens your technical expertise, vertical development improves how you think and how you interpret situations. It's essential to address complex problems. It also supports us in cultivating high-stakes relationships and helps us to navigate rapidly changing and uncertain circumstances. I think everybody will agree that we live in a world that very much fits that description. So while horizontal development can help us to solve complicated problems, clearly defined problems that have known solutions, our vertical development can help us to solve more complex problems. Vertical development helps us to develop mental complexity, and it literally upgrades our leadership operating system and has the impact of making us more wise and more caring. And metaphorically, it's like an upgrade to the operating platform as opposed to adding new apps to the existing device. Okay, any questions?
Not at the moment, but it's interesting actually. I've never heard about these different terms, and we're working about how to create knowledge and share knowledge in Gita community. So it's interesting the separation they did.
Right. The impact of that knowledge, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to just tell a little story from the work of Jean Piaget, who's recognized as one of the founding fathers of developmental theory. And Piaget had a particular interest in child development, and the work that he did was pretty extraordinary. But there's a beautiful story from one of his research subjects, a little girl. And in his interview with this little girl, he asked her the question, "What makes the wind?" And the little girl thought for a moment, and she said, "The trees. The trees make the wind." And Piaget teased her out and said, "You know, tell me more. Why is this the case?" And she took a piece of paper and she waved it at him like this. And she said, "Look, this is how wind is made," which is really genius. It's brilliant. It's not the right answer to his question, but it's what Piaget termed an assimilation. She didn't know the answer to the question, but she was able to make meaning of it by running the question through her existing knowledge. She knew that this resulted in wind being made. So it's easy then to assimilate an answer to the question that says, right, out there, what's happening is there is wind and the trees are making it. But you have to imagine at some stage in her later development, she was outside and it was windy and there were no trees around. And so at that point, she had to accommodate a new understanding of this phenomenon. And there was that kind of uncomfortable, perhaps, realization that, oh, my theory about the wind was wrong. I need to understand it differently. So at that point, she would have to acquire new knowledge to understand the answer to the question. But up to that point, she was quite happy with her explanation. So this idea that Piaget promoted of assimilation and accommodation is important when we talk about horizontal and vertical development. Because according to Piaget, there are two processes at work in our cognitive development. This notion of assimilation, which occurs when we modify or change new information to fit in to our existing schema or worldview, what we already know, or else because we feel the discomfort of what's happening in the environment being different to our existing belief system, we have to accommodate. And that's in that way we restructure or modify what we already know so that the new information fits in. So this goes back to the point I made earlier about the little nugget of knowledge that I might share with people. It's not just the sharing of that one nugget of knowledge. It doesn't stand alone, because when it joins existing knowledge and existing perceptions and existing beliefs, it becomes different for everybody. So Piaget's work has been foundational in the development of what we call constructivist development theory. And constructivism is the idea that there is no objective reality waiting for each of us to discover it. We create reality because every situation that emerges in front of us, we run it through the lens of what we already know, and we create our version of that reality. So for each of us, reality appears different. So we either interpret our current reality exclusively through our existing lens by assimilating, or we allow our current emergent experience to alter the lens and we accommodate. So the nature of the lens we're using is somewhat measurable, and knowing about this can support our developmental process. So understanding this idea of assimilation and accommodation, understanding horizontal and vertical development, is in itself horizontal learning. It's learning the facts of this theory. But those facts in turn can impact upon the way we see the world, and it can support our vertical development and change the way we see the world. As a strapline, I added into my topic how this impacts on executive teams, because that's where I spend most of my time at work. And when we land these ideas with teams of people, it can have a major impact. Where we succeed in the act of supporting them to assimilate, it really can have a very impactful effect on individuals and on teams. So we focus on supporting people to understand the map of adult development, and that opens the possibility of people proactively engaging with their own development and supporting their further vertical growth. When people appreciate the value of shared problem solving in the face of complex problems, it deepens fellowship and improves functionality that leads to better management of the complexity in hand. So this notion of developing vertically together not alone assists us to deal with complexity, but it also accelerates our development if we can get executive teams to a place where they feel psychologically safe and trusting of each other to do that. The net effect of this is that lots of time is saved avoiding the rush to fix complex problems when the team develops the capacity to discern the difference between, is the problem complicated or is it complex? In which case, if it's complicated, we can apply a horizontal fix. If it's complex, then we need to engage with our latter stages of vertical development to support us to solve the problem. The process of development, as I've said here, is ongoing. It's a lifelong journey. And at 60 years of age, I'm clinging to this theory with great hope that I could continue to develop into my continuing old age. So, that would have taken me through a breakout and to a group discussion. But it's going to be limited to the discussion that emerges between the three of us now. So did that make sense? Give me critical feedback.
Well, for
give
me,
me good feedback then.
No, well, in some manners, it was a bit difficult for me personally to understand, because some of the terms are very, the Hebrew translation for the words you're using in English are very much similar. So it feels like my translation sounds much the same, and I need to work on what's exactly the difference once you were talking about it. But overall, I think it's the whole separation between the things is something very new to me, to think of complex and what was the other? So I think it's interesting to see how you use it actually, you know, when you have an issue on your table. And like, I'm not sure if it's something you understand before, or doing the thing you're working on, you understand, okay, this is the horizontal, or understand the question? I'm here trying still to understand exactly what you were saying, but I think it's my lack of understanding, not so clear in the message you transform.
So your English is way better than my Hebrew, Rona.
That's at least that.
Yeah, so I'm full of admiration for your multilingual capacity. I have a little spattering of Irish, and that's about it for me. Mm-hmm. So Rebecca, you're familiar with these ideas, of course, and I mean, I tried to bring some simplicity to the presentation, but if I had brought more simplicity to the title, then I might have ended up with an audience, you know. So a lesson learned there.
Yeah, I thought you did a great job, Niall. It's a really difficult topic to talk about and bring to life for people in one sort of short burst, I think.
Yeah.
You know, and
but
I'm not sure.
I think it's very important to share this. I feel like it's something. It's a different way it's a different approach to something that can lead to a different way of acting and decision making. If I understood a bit, I'm just like the first toe in the water here.
I teach a module at the MBA program here at the university, and you're probably fed up hearing this story, Rebecca. I told it a lot recently, but given what our marketing guru said this morning, I'm going to keep using it. So one of my students this year is a doctor. She's a young doctor in her early 30s, and she has spent, it's a module as part of their MBA, so she spent quite a bit of time studying horizontal and vertical development this year. And in writing about it in her end of year assignment, she said, look, all of my education up to this has been horizontal learning, learn the facts. And she had a deep sense that there was something else that needed to be learned. And this presented her with the doorway to that learning. So it's not just about the accumulation of facts. It's also about, very often when people talk about this, they use the metaphor of a glass, and horizontal learning being filling the glass with water or whatever. Whereas vertical development is about making the glass bigger, making it a bigger container so that more knowledge can be held. The other quotation I often use when I talk about the topic is that lovely line from W.B. Yeats, who once said that with age comes wisdom, but sometimes age comes alone. Mm-hmm. So the hope would be that with age would come wisdom, and it can be developed.
But who do you think, I will ask you, if that's okay, a question, since sounds like you're a professional in some way of that topic specifically. where do you think it's not that common, yeah, what you're talking about, this vertical development, and I'm wondering where in the system of learning, you know, of humanity, basics of learning, is the right place to try and you know, drip it in this kind of thinking and development, because teacher in schools, at least in Israel, it's like it's they're not there. Let's just bring the facts to the kids. Hopefully they move the test until the next grade, and then it's someone else's problem. And then they grow up as adults who don't know how to deal with any other kind of questions or thinking unless their personality is bigger than that, and they're curious and they love to learn and love to ask the different, you know, questions. But where do you think in the system, or who has the responsibility for developing this kind of thinking and development?
What a wonderful question. Who has responsibility? Well, I guess we're assuming some responsibility for that because we're really passionate about it. I mean, I think it needs to be integrated into the education system, where as part of our learning, we start very early on to learn about ourselves. And in vertical development in adulthood, we readily recognize that a key part of our development is to learn about ourselves, because very often we don't know about ourselves. I think it was one of the Chinese philosophers that said, he who knows others is learned, but he who knows himself is wise. So it should be part of the school curriculum, I would say, Rona, but additionally, I think, and more it's starting to happen, that it becomes part of the work curriculum, that if an employer brings somebody into work in their organization, with that comes the responsibility to support their vertical development. Corporations and organizations typically have a vested interest in the horizontal development of their people, giving them the technical knowledge required to do the job. But they also have a responsibility, I think, to support their vertical development. And I think this is coming more and more to the fore now, as particularly as Agile starts to run up against the constraints. Agile is a fabulous theory in theory. In practice, the people who execute Agile ways of working are typically people who have a well-developed capacity. So unless we stretch our development, there are limitations with the ways in which we can work in systems like Lean and Agile. So yeah. I hope that's a kind of a wandering answer to your question.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's interesting. It's very, very interesting, this whole topic. That now I wish more people would have joined the conversation now that I understand what you're talking about. Because
this is exactly the problem that we have. You know, how do you? And years ago, Steve Jobs declared arrogantly, people thought at the time, he said, "I don't ask customers what they want, because they don't know what Apple are capable of giving them. So they cannot ask for what they want because they haven't imagined it yet." So we wrestle a little bit with that problem, but we'll find better ways to crack it, I think, as we go on. Certainly the impact that this work has on people is significant. And I think as that message spreads, it will become more and more mainstream.
What would you say the main impact of that?
I think those words in one of my slides about people becoming more wise and caring, I think when people are introduced to these ideas, it deepens their knowledge of themselves. It helps them to understand other people's perspectives. And I think it kind of generally enhances people's humility and desire to develop further, you know.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
Just my experience. I've worked in quite a few large global blue chip organizations, and where I think this is what drew me to heart, it was my passion for this, is that they go so far and then they get stuck and they loop, and particularly at the moment with a changing world out there. So for example, you know, when you had a retail footprint needing to move to more of an online business or even reinvent yourself as an online business, a very complex kind of scenario. So how do you do that? So I think where this model comes into its own is actually helping people get unstuck. So to think in a different way, to expand their thinking, to look at greater perspectives, some level of self-awareness in that as well, about who I am and what's holding me back. And I think the same thing with individuals. I don't know if you would agree with this, Niall, but often I think it helps people get unstuck. I think where we see people in this kind of developmental framework is where there's something they've been doing and it's really served them well, but in some context in their current situation, it's no longer serving them well. Yeah. And that's where there comes this tension that they want to do something different. And I think that's where it kind of comes into its own. It helps them to focus, doesn't it? It gives them a focal point about where do they focus their development. I think that's where it really helps.
And I think to that end, because we're habituated into looking for horizontal solutions, people don't appreciate how much they actually hold in terms of pieces of the jigsaw. I mean, in any organization, no external consultants know more about what it takes to fix their problem. They are the world experts on their own challenges. And I think if people appreciated how collective thinking, and this is why this little point about the knowledge, the piece of knowledge, you know, even though everybody might have the same piece of knowledge, everybody holds it in a different kind of container and has a different perspective. So a lot of our work ends up more as facilitative work rather than teaching work. You know, so we join in the system and we support them in the system to share what they know. And very often that's where the answers are, not in some magic solution. But the marketeers would have us believe that there's a secret. You know, if you pass through the airport at any stage and you go to the bookshop, you'll see all of these books that have the answer. And we need to stop relying on those. We need to realize that for complex problems, we have significant pieces of the answer ourselves. And I think that the real secret is that there is no secret. As somebody once said, there is no path. The path is made by walking. But that takes courage, and that takes the courage to break out of the dead shell of yesterday, as John O'Donoghue so beautifully wrote.
Interesting.
Right, ladies, can I free you into your Friday evening? And if by finishing a little bit early, I bring you closer to a glass of wine or something like that, I'll be all the happier.